welcome everybody to the Tuesday, December 17th, 2024 City of Erie Planning Commission meeting. Mark Klecker, Chair, present. Rich, present. Tony, absent, correct?
Yes.
Colin,
Present.
And Jason.
Present.
All right. Everybody read the minutes?
Yes.
I did. Anybody have anything? Well, I need a motion to accept those.
So moved.
And
Second.
Second.
killing me.
He
All
does
right, all in
alrighty.
favor. All right, existing future character areas analysis.
So I had mentioned to you and sent to you the scope of work for the character analysis. We have Michael Baker here, Michael Baker International. Let them introduce themselves to go over the scope with you and to explain the project, the schedule, and what the outcomes will be for this project. So, Kathy, I'll let you guys introduce yourself.
Jackie. Kathy Rosdick with Michael Baker International. I know everyone here, so I won't extend the introduction anymore, but turn it over to Seth. And we do have someone online too that we'll introduce, and she's going to share the screen with some talking points to help keep us on track.
Hi everyone, my name is Seth Coons. I'm a senior community planner with the Design Hub in Michael Baker out of our Pittsburgh office. Work with Kathy and Sam across the states on various different zoning projects.
Do you all mind talking into the microphone a little bit?
Yeah.
Or sorry.
It's right here in front of you. Hopefully it was picking that up. If you didn't hear me, my name is Seth Coons out of the Pittsburgh office with Michael Baker.
Okay.
Perfect. Sam and Kathy and I work together collaborative on a lot of different projects, so we're excited to be here today, and I'll turn it over to Sam.
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Samantha McLean. I'm a senior community planner with Michael Baker International out of the Allentown office, and I'm working with Kathy and Seth on this existing and future character area analysis. Seth and I have had the chance to bring this approach to a lot of different communities throughout the Commonwealth and are excited to apply it to the city of Erie. I do want to just echo what Mr. Russ just said about the sound. It is a little difficult to hear. It seems like people are going in and out when they're speaking. So if you could try to get a little closer because I'm hearing like every other word.
Oh, okay.
Thank you, Sam.
Samantha, can you hear us better? It's as loud as everything right now.
Would you like me to share my screen?
If you wouldn't mind, it's a little bit easier
Sure.
with the, since we don't have a way to connect. I'll let you. So we just have, go ahead. And Samantha, we're going to let you talk through some of the slides. I'll do the intro and then I'll let you talk through the process. And we can just go to the next slide, which is the agenda. Thanks. Okay. So, I don't have the full scope in front, so I'll just talk through the scope. It's pretty simple. It's 3 months. And we're kicking it off right now with interviews with the Planning Commission. We had some discussions with the zoning office, the planning department. We'll talk with the neighborhood groups. And just let's talk a little bit about the why. Today we're going to talk about the goals of the project and the process. We'll talk a little bit about what we've just sort of identified through reviewing some of the most recent plans going back to Erie Refocused. And talk about community development objectives and why those are important, and then zoning and land use challenges and takeaways. But let me talk a little bit about why we're here and why this idea sort of presented itself, and we thought it was a natural next step. Having a lot of communication with Jackie, and I know the commission has worked diligently on a number of zoning updates, which is always kind of a challenge, but there has been a desire to maybe relook the entire zoning ordinance, like look at it from cover to cover to see, is it really truly meeting our objectives? Are there other issues and areas? Instead of piecemealing sections for updates, should we just not look at the zoning ordinance as a whole and potentially the subdivision and land development ordinance as a whole? And we did talk about maybe let's do a zoning analysis and identify areas, from a third party's perspective reviewing that we see are not best practices, not, what other communities are doing these days to address issues. The challenge with doing that process now is what you really need as a community when you move into a project like this, if you're going to update your zoning, you need to have goals established. What is it we want to do? What is it we want to see in our community? And how is the zoning going to help us achieve that? So these overarching goals that are generally accepted by the community as a whole, not just the commission, but is it something city council actually aspires to? Is it what residents are asking for? And so we thought it was a good process to kind of take a step back and say, well, what are the goals? What are we trying to achieve? A lot of times communities do that process through a comprehensive plan and then have a set of goals and say, okay, our goals are X, Y, and Z. We need our zoning to help us reflect how we achieve that. In lieu of doing a comprehensive plan and doing a zoning, it's like, you've already done that. It's just been maybe it's almost 10 years now since the comprehensive plan was done. You've done a lot of plans, though. There's been a lot of planning work that was launched 5-6 years ago and has continued. So can we glean certain goals and objectives from the planning work that you've already done that can help frame what the next step in an overhaul with your zoning ordinance looks like? So that's one, and we see this character area analysis basically looking at how does your city look now? How does it look? How does it feel? Not the policy, not the things that you grapple with, the zoning officers, hear complaints on a day-to-day basis, but how does it look like now? And then our goals are, how should it look like in the future? So you basically are creating a future land use map, character area map, of how we anticipate it looking in the future. And then the zoning helps create that vision. It's essentially a vision. So we thought, let's start with that and work with you to create what those objectives are and see where there might be conflict with what's on the ground now or what's happening on the ground. So this is like more of a superficial look at what a zoning ordinance can do. It is one of your greatest tools to affect development in this community that local government solidly has control over. The SALDO is another significant tool. So I think giving this some really deep thought and discovery is helpful. And it helps us create this baseline of what is our vision without having to go through a comprehensive plan. At least not right now. That might be something that you want to take up. But I really liked what Seth and Samantha had been doing with these character area. We call them character area analysis because it's not zoning districts. It's what does this form look like? And two architects sitting up here would understand that very much. I remember the conflict with waterfront district development. The density can be an issue, but what does it look like and how does it relate to the existing neighborhood was always a point of contention. So that's stuff like that can help discover, are we actually meeting our objectives? And that was, this is just sort of a precursor. So when you move into doing a full-blown zoning update, you've already done some analysis yourself, some internal discovery of yourself and saying, here's what we expect out of whoever may come our way, or if we decide to do it in-house, this is what we expect the outcome of that effort to produce. Hopefully that makes some sense to you. But that's overall the goals of the project. This is a three-month project, and we're starting, like I said, with these types of discussions. It won't be an exhaustive stakeholder outreach. It's just enough to give us to influence, give us a sort of a draft of what do you think those objectives are. Any questions about that process? Okay. I think next I'm going to hand it over to you, Samantha, and if you could just kind of talk through the process of the character area analysis, I think that would be helpful.
Sure.
I already spoke.
So Kathy did a great job outlining the goals of this process in general, but what does it look like on a step-to-step level? So you'll see this process diagram from left to right outlines what you can expect from our team. We start with a series of inputs that will help us populate the existing character areas map. First, a site tour, which Kathy and Seth did today, and I'll be doing next week, actually, when I'm in Erie for the holidays. And then we use what we've learned from the site tour, along with stakeholder interviews, and then a desktop geographic information systems, GIS analysis, to inform the existing character areas of the city. So what is happening on the ground, not necessarily what it is zoned for now, but what is the look and feel and uses occurring on the ground. So all those inputs lead us to the existing character areas map. To get from the existing character areas to where you want to go in the future, that future character areas map, we add an input, and that is those community development objectives that we are working on that are informed by your past plans review, or all the past plans that you've worked on and the review that we're doing. So we'll share this a little bit later in the presentation, but we've been looking at the plans that you've been working on or have worked on in the past and have collected any kind of recommendation that has a land use or built form implication, and those will inform the community development objectives. Once we have that list of community development objectives, we look at your existing character areas map and we see where there's a mismatch. So just for an example, if there is a certain corridor that's identified to transition from a more auto-oriented commercial corridor to a more mixed-use corridor, that's an area of the existing character areas map that we would identify to change for in the future character areas map. So we use those community development objectives to start understanding where there's a mismatch between future vision and goals in terms of land use and built form and what you have now. So by looking at those two things, we come up with a future character areas map, essentially a future land use map that then it kind of serves as the precursor to your draft zoning map in the future. And what this looks like kind of in practice, this existing character areas map really helps to establish an understanding of the existing form on the ground before trying to think about what you want to see in the future. It's good to make sure that we're all working off of the same existing character areas map. This is an example that we worked on in Indiana Borough, Pennsylvania. You can see that the map does not follow parcel boundaries. So we use hexagons, half acre, quarter acre hexagons as a way to keep these existing character areas and future character areas maps a little more conceptual in nature, because it allows us to really focus on the conversation that we want to have rather than people getting really bogged down on what's happening on their specific parcel. So this gives us a level of detail that's easy to translate into a future zoning map, but without getting worried about those details at this stage. So this is an example of an existing character areas map. And then here you'll see, and I'm just going to toggle back and forth between the two slides a couple times, the difference between the existing character areas map in Indiana and the future character areas map. So in general, we look for areas that might be have like a lot of different pockets of uses or built forms that you want to kind of consolidate into a more kind of uniform or more consistent form. So for example, in Indiana, it was along some of their commercial corridors. You'll see that gets filled in a little more by their mixed use corridor, future character area zone. but it didn't necessarily change all of the borough. So there's a lot of areas that are stable and that you want to maintain as they are. And those existing character areas will be carried forth into the future character areas map, depending on what your community development objectives say.
Samantha?
I do want to pause right now. Yeah, and actually I was going to hand it to Seth to see if he wanted to share anything about this process.
I was going to say, could you explain a little bit about what their objectives were in Indiana and how that affected the map?
Yeah, so Sam and I have both worked on these projects collectively, but I've been taking a little bit more of a lead on Indiana. She's taking a little bit more of a lead on other projects, so I can speak more directly towards Indiana. The red band you're seeing around the blue area.
I'm sorry to be difficult. Do you mind leaning or pulling the microphone a little bit closer? It's just
I know.
it might be on my end. Sorry.
It's like 2 inches from my mouth. So the bright blue kind of pool of water that we see on the map, that's Indiana University. The red band around it is a mixed-use area, which they had, kind of conceptually designated as part of their comprehensive plan and through other planning initiatives. So that was one of the primary goals, is let's reestablish the grounds and the criteria for a new mixed-use corridor that surrounds Indiana University. They also had priorities on focusing on their downtown core and the extension out of the downtown core and some of the transitional areas between the downtown and residential. So you'll see the downtown core in the dark red in the center, and then off to the east and west and north and south are some transitional character areas that we've used to help inform their proposed zoning map, which we are working on right now. As far as the borough itself was concerned, their residential areas, especially their R1 or low density residential, was stable, fully functional, did not need a lot of heavy-handed approach. So it remained largely the same. There were some pockets where there was some inherently more dense development that would transition into more of a denser zoning district or character area. But for the large part, their residential areas were functioning and working well. So it was their individual objectives were more mixed use and commercial transition focused rather than hyper focused on residential areas. But every community is different, right? And that's been a totally different issue than what we've been dealing with in other communities where we've taken this approach. So it's really helpful to be able to use this tool to kind of flesh through and talk through some of those initial community development objectives at a conceptual level, again, as Sam mentioned, without having to get into the nitty-gritty of a zoning map right out of the chute.
Thanks, Seth. Samantha, you want to go through some of the plans that you reviewed and talk about that?
Yes, absolutely. So something that we really are looking forward to our discussion today with you for is like understanding the plans that you have and your perspective as a planning commission on some of the past planning efforts. So in preparation for our conversation, we took a look at some of your previous plans, including Erie Refocused, the Erie Downtown Streetscape Master Plan, the Historic Preservation Plan, 12th Street Reimagined, a series of neighborhood plans, and the Wayne Health and Wealth Equity District plans. We also looked at the Federal Hill Plan, the Strategy, Actions, and Investments plans, and the Greater Little Italy, Federal Hill Connections Plan, and Active Erie, but did not find as many recommendations from those plans that would inform a character areas analysis as much as the plans that you see here on the left. So during our plans review, we made a note of any kind of objective, recommendation, goal, action that would have some sort of land use or built form implication. From that, we were able to kind of drill down into what we see as 6 different kind of emerging themes or goals from these plans. Some of the plans talk about a mixed-use development, especially in downtown nodes, investment in the public realm being streetscapes along corridors and streets, connecting the Bayfront neighborhood with downtown, corridor enhancements along Parade Street, and then also just in general using public space or thinking about public space as an economic development generator. Regarding commercial areas, we saw a desire to kind of cluster businesses strategically in certain areas. And then specifically in the Wayne Health and Wealth Equity District, a desire for some design guidelines to help direct the form of commercial redevelopment. There were, well, some of these themes kind of applied across the city. Some of them were very specific in terms of geography. So in downtown specifically, there was a lot of discussion around defining districts to create a sense of place. So an innovation district, for example. And then also a discussion of what the impact of relocating some human services operations, what that would look like in terms of the uses and form in downtown. Additionally, the fifth goal or emerging theme that we saw throughout these plans was a desire for redevelopment and adaptive reuse of certain spaces. So transforming industrial properties into modern mixed-use spaces, the reuse of the Burton School, and the former Riley Stoker site, kind of using a transition of uses in that area. So certainly a lot of areas that were previously operating as a certain use or previously in operation for something else that can be reimagined as redevelopment occurs. And then finally, kind of this bucket of that impacts like design and form and historic preservation. So looking at how to make kind of more walkable, pedestrian-oriented environments through the orientation of parking and where you put access points for vehicles, orienting buildings, closer to the sidewalk, using build to lines, a focus on certain types of buffering or landscaping, and then removing kind of outdoor advertising as a by right use in some areas.
And I just wanted to add to Samantha that this exercise was done without my input at all. So I had people who have never worked on these plans read through them and say, okay, what are you gleaning from what we were saying we wanted to do? And I thought that was important. You had a sort of a fresh set of eyes. Say if anyone walks in here and says, what is the city of Erie trying to do? This is what's in our plans. So I just wanted to kind of pause here, and then we've summarized a few key takeaways. Does this make sense to you? Is this like, yeah, that's what I would say our goals are essentially, and we'll craft them a little bit more fine-tuned, but what Samantha just went over, some of it was surprising to me, but I don't want to, again, I have an insight that's a little different. But this is probably the first time you've been able to go through this exercise of a lot of the plans that you worked on or have seen. Does this seem... There was a lot to go over, but essentially we're talking about streetscape, public realm, clustering, a lot of downtown focus, which is not unsurprising. Corridor redevelopment.
Root of the current problems with the zoning code. Nobody's touched on what are the current barriers in zoning.
Yeah.
Which, we would deal with on a regular basis, where we tell our clients to go to other municipalities where it's easier to get jobs done. So what are those barriers? Do we want to talk about those?
Yeah.
Lot coverage, parking requirements, things that we've talked about for the last couple of years.
So, and that's kind of where I was headed. So you got plans that you've spent time...
But none of those plans identify those issues.
Right.
Sourcing from mediocrity is kind of a waste of time, in my opinion.
Well, I'm just saying that this is a time in which you can come together and say, what is it we're trying to do here?
We've been saying the same thing for years.
Right.
But hasn't changed.
But it's, okay, then, is there a disconnect then from what you're saying or experiencing and what's being produced from a larger planning initiative?
Yeah, reality and...
Okay.
And, yeah.
I think there's consistently a disconnect.
Is that, what did Russ say? Sorry, what did you say, Russ?
I said I think that there's consistently a disconnect.
And I think, again, I haven't sat in these meetings in a couple of years, but I also saw that when I saw what they were seeing, reviewing these plans, and what you've been working on. So let's talk about what's the disconnect. You talked about parking, so community development, that's where we're trying to get to. What is it that you want to have happen here that you see is not happening, and why? And it doesn't have to be super specific, or it can be super specific. Oh, this guy wanted to do X, and we gave him, 7 different reasons why he or she couldn't do X. Is it parking? Too much parking?
No, it's a little bit of everything, but
everything.
let's use an example that you should be familiar with. Let's go to our West Bayfront. West 8th Street. You drive down it, it feels commercial. Can't go build a restaurant there right now. Can't put a store there right now.
Because of the zoning?
Yes.
Okay. So
The whole corridor from Frontier all the way into the city feels like a commercial district. There's a mix of RLB and pre-existing commercial entities. So a client comes to me and says, I want to build a restaurant in the West Bayfront. I look at the zoning map, can't build anywhere on that strip. There's a few blocks on Liberty we can build. Other than that, we got to find something that's grandfathered in. But as a resident of the neighborhood, a member of the board of our West Bayfront, there's a desire and a hunger to have restaurants and third places in our neighborhood that we can congregate. Our zoning prohibits that.
Yeah,
Jason, can you pull your microphone a little closer? Sorry.
Sorry, I wasn't projecting well enough. But where in here are we identifying the barriers to development?
Right.
We can talk about trees and landscaping all day, and it's a waste of time. It's not moving the needle for anybody.
That's 100% right. So next slide real quick. And everything here on this slide, maybe not everything, most of it you're saying is not relevant to the future of, the future is these redevelopment of our neighborhoods needs to be in a context that allows a lot of flexibility and mixed use because they're historic neighborhoods. They were built like that 100 years ago. So the built form begs for that to continue. What did I talk about, the barbecue place that's no longer? Yeah, one of the challenges was he couldn't expand his business for where he was. But these were, we synthesized what was in your plans to these community development objectives. And Jason, I don't think this speaks to exactly what you said. So there's a disconnect between the work that's being done on sort of the broad planning and drilling down to what you actually want to see in the policy, in the law. There's a disconnect. So, and I can tell you, reading some of the neighborhood plans, I think the neighborhood plans, some of the ones that the city did, are different. But the neighborhood plans that are being done by the neighborhood groups are hyper-specific for them to operationalize as a nonprofit. It doesn't speak to land use issues, for the most part. So how do we get to a consensus, like you said? We want and that was perfect, we want our core historic neighborhoods to be really super flexible so things can happen, but there's a limit to that, right? There's probably a limit to that. So what's the limit? We don't know. That's what I'm getting to. As you're driving, as people are coming to you with complaints or you as an architect because they want to do a development on the private side of this discussion, and there's a barrier in the zoning ordinance that allows them, what's the guiding light? You're reacting to that issue. So what are the guideposts that you actually want to move forward instead of just reacting to the complaint? What's the guidepost that you want to move forward and change the zoning to make this work for you instead of just reacting? You said one, neighborhood.
We just need reasonable flexibility, and it doesn't have that.
Yeah. Reasonable flexibility that resembles the current historic context.
Yeah, just for general adaptive reuse of, we've got corner stores that we can't use as corner stores anymore.
Exactly. And sometimes they become noxious uses because property owners can't do anything else with them. You know, landlords come in and take advantage of spaces and not giving back to the neighborhood. That's powerful, and it's not in any of your plans. It says that.
No. Abandoned churches, the redevelopment
And
authority.
we also just passed, an amendment that provides a ton of flexibility for those builders to come in and, build more on less space. And doing so, if anything, allows them to more closely keep with the historic character of those neighborhoods.
Yeah,
We've given them flexibility on how, not where.
so where is important that needs to be filled in, but the how, you feel like you've addressed.
I think we've chipped away
You've-
at that.
Yeah. And, yeah, so that would be my next question. Where? Is it everywhere? How flexible? And you've probably grappled with some of those discussions already, but, is the downtown and the core neighborhood still a priority, which is what your plans are saying? Or is it now Sisters of St. Joseph and Academy and, do those other areas need
I mean,
to be
personally, I think we
considered?
should have high density, low density, and pure commercial. And, high density gives you that mix. And we have so many different zones for zoning, different subcategories, that's just an unnecessary level of red tape and burden on developers and development. But, increasingly limits what can or will be built because they don't want the headache. So, I mean, fundamentally, we need to dramatically simplify, which I think we've started taking some steps to, but, we have to stop trying to solve for every nuanced, unique one-off scenario and, cover, the bulk, get what we can, get 2 standard deviations within what we have, and then we'll handle, that's what, hearing boards are for.
Right. So you want something that's much more simplistic, keep it simple, the KISS analysis for us is something that's simpler to administer and simple for the developer to understand or the private property owner to understand.
Yeah, I mean, I think it goes to what Jason was saying with, reasonable flexibility. Keep it simple, make it flexible and adaptable, and, we shouldn't overcomplicate something like this.
And I think that's probably one of the hardest things to achieve because honestly, we hear that a lot working with our communities. Oh, we just want it to make it simple. And then when you start revising the zoning and saying, okay, where do the uses fit? And then they say, well, you have to sort of consider a lot of different uses, bars and skill games and industrial and manufacturing. Then it becomes a little, you start getting a little more cautious, saying, all right, well, maybe not that much flexibility, because do we really want that adjacent to my house? You got to be personal. Do I really want that to open up? Maybe you don't. But you're right. It's a nice, I think it's a nice and aspirational goal to try to obtain. How do we make this much more easier to administer and understand? But you also just talked about, or at least Jason did, we need a lot of mixed-use opportunities in these existing older neighborhoods. So it's not just commercial, that's siloed, commercial versus
Right.
residential versus density or high density.
Yeah, I think it's trying to, everything is so sliced in zones. I mean, do we need just all single-family zoning or wide swath of it? Would it be so bad if most neighborhoods accommodated 2-family dwellings? That kind of thing that is widely not possible in the city. And the fact is that since the city is largely built out, largely has been developed,
You're in a redevelopment mode, for sure.
Oh,
The city
yeah,
is,
but
right?
it's not as if someone's going to come in and tear down a neighborhood and build high-rise housing. There just isn't the demand for it, at least not now. There's, I think, little likelihood that things are going to change dramatically. So allowing some incremental additional development kind of thing, infill development kind of opportunities, to me makes a lot of sense. And I think it's a false dichotomy to say that we either have to look at central city and the core neighborhoods and don't worry about anything else, or we have to go that direction. You have to do, it's a both and kind of thing, that a lot of Erie has been neglected for a long time with plans to move specific neighborhoods and address specific problems. I think that's changed, in the last decade or so, my time in the Planning Commission, that we need to be able to do both. I mean, downtown Erie downtown development came out of Erie Refocused. I mean, the whole notion that to create that kind of entity started there. And that's worked spectacularly so far. What we need is to bring that same kind of energy to other parts of the neighborhood and enable them to be reinforced and move forward.
Yeah. How, that's a great narrative right there. How do we do it in zoning? Do you have an idea, the concept of how you would recreate EDDC in other neighborhoods through zoning? Or we can come back to that question.
I'll jump in on it. I think we need some guiding principles, overarching principles. The biggest one to me, if I was the mayor of this city, I would use this for all of my leadership thinking, is livability. What makes people want to live here? What makes people want to stay here? What would want to make people move here? And does our zoning allow for that? One of the biggest trends nationally and internationally right now that I feel like nobody's ever talked about in Erie is 15-minute cities. We've got neighborhoods that are teed up for that, but don't have the zoning to allow for the grocery store to be put in the middle of it. We don't need a market on the bayfront. Doesn't do anything for a city that has 40% of its population that doesn't have a car. We need the markets in the neighborhoods where people can walk to them and use them.
Yeah.
Our zoning doesn't allow for that. Right. So how do we fix the parts of our zoning code that make our city unlivable?
Yeah. Unlivable for the type of life you want in an urban environment, right? If you don't want an urban environment.
Move to Waterford then.
Waterford, Mill Creek.
Wherever, I don't
Mill
care.
Creek, come on.
You live in the city for urban, you live here for.
Right, like that's right. I mean, I tell the story all the time. When we were moving to Erie for the first time, Frontier was, or it could have been our West Bay Front too, but I wanted my son to be able to walk to school, and he was going to go to Erie Day School. So my 15 minutes was very specific, and it allowed for that, right? I could live in one spot, and we chose Frontier. It was super specific, so my son at 12, whether or not you think I'm a bad parent or not at 12, it allowed my son to walk to Erie Day. And that was the reason we chose the city versus anywhere else, because it afforded that opportunity to do that. And, oh, by the way, there's a great park there too. And, oh, by the way, there's also some nice view of the water. So you're right. The uniqueness that's in the city is rare and almost can't be found outside the city. So the people who are seeking that kind of life, the reason you're still in the city, Jason, and the reason that you still choose to live here, for many reasons, is people seek that out. And Erie Insurance, right, is really trying to get their young employees to come and want to work here and live in Erie. So that's really, it's really super important to document that. Like that's what at least that's what this commission wants. I would be shocked, but we might hear something different when we talk to the neighborhood groups. Don't know that we will. They're going to be hyper specific about some of the ailments of their particular neighborhood, but holistically, I think that makes sense. What else haven't we captured? And you'll get another bite at this apple because we'll be here. But we want to go back and then kind of reflect on these. And then I'll shut up. No, I won't.
No, you won't.
Wait a minute, okay.
The reason this process is so important, and I go back to a community I'm working with right now on a comprehensive plan, Manheim Township. It's the Cranberry Township-esque type of township right outside the city of Lancaster. They don't have an issue with people wanting to live there. Everyone wants to live there. So what that means is housing is really unaffordable. So you can't get in to the township. And once you're in, once your children are grown and you don't need that big house anymore, you can't stay. So that became a significant objective for them, is that we want to find opportunities to allow affordable housing. And I'm not talking about subsidized housing. We just want it to be median income. You can afford to buy a house in the township. So that's what drove us when we did a zoning analysis. Okay, what's the barrier to affordable housing in their zoning? So we need to have those objectives established before you really start deep diving. What are the barriers to that established? What their barriers were: 65% of their township is zoned for single-family development. They've got an agricultural district in the township that protects 500 acres of ag, which is great, but that comes at a price. There is one zoning district that encompasses 6% of their township that allows for apartments by right. 6% of their township allows condos or apartments by right. There's their affordability problem. You have to unwind that, and it's hard to do because they are too built out. So what are they doing? Looking at redevelopment. Where can we take these underdeveloped sites and encourage apartments, mixed use? And where are they located? Close to the city of Lancaster, where people want to be. So it's really important to establish those. That's extremely helpful. What you got and even when you're frustrated by it, it's really helpful to say that's what we want. So pausing there, everything you just said, very little of it's on the screen. Okay, it's important. Is there anything else that we haven't discussed?
Well, we haven't talked, we've mentioned density. And I think that one of the city's unfortunate in the history of it is that, starting in the 20s, areas of the city began to convert from single-family houses to more the development of larger apartment blocks. Along West 6th Street, you can see that began to happen. In the 30s and 40s, you could see that on Upper State Street, that the arrival of multiple family dwellings. And we have to allow flexibility for that to happen in other neighborhoods, or continue in those neighborhoods where it makes sense to be able to address that. And right now, I don't think there's, I don't know that you could do that in a lot of those neighborhoods.
The missing middle, right?
Yeah.
That's where we're going you guys, where can you build a townhome?
Right.
It just doesn't exist here for your empty nesters. And
Right. Yeah, and I think that's it. I think certainly we need some urban design, urban development guidelines to address that, The zoning requirements for a lot of the city reflect 1960s suburban developments. Big lots, big side yards, big front setbacks, you know. One of the reasons I live for a long, long time in Frontier is because the lots are smaller. There are
No mowing.
yeah, less mowing. You know, setbacks and those kinds of things, particularly with the requirement you have to match the neighbors,
The neighbors,
that is more compact. The neighborhood has more cohesiveness to it. And as you go south in the city, south of 38th Street almost, you lose that. You see a lot of big lots, lots of wasted space, lots of increased development cost when that was done. And that's not a quick fix. That's not going to happen. You know, you go out and do it because you can't just stick somebody's lot in a copier and reduce it by 40% to tighten everything up. But it's, you know, I think it's a longer term change that needs to be inculcated or included in whatever comes out of this.
Okay, that's helpful. This has been extremely helpful. I do have one other sort of slide I think might be, to the next. So this, and in preparing for this, I was just picking an area in the city to kind of pique your reaction to. And I thought sort of that Lower East Side and even going a little bit further. And some of the projects that I'm familiar with, there may be more that are happening. I think IRG is on this map too. You know, things like Erie Coke. 12th Street, the plan that was recently done was West Side. What does East Side look like? Savacchio Business Park with some of the moves that are happening there. We could have done the Burton School on this. Parade Street, of course, has shown a lot of, there's a lot of interest in redevelopment. I mean, Erie Coke's kind of the biggest piece of this. When you're thinking about overall objectives, and, you know, add what you like here, of what you want the zoning ordinance to do for you and the zoning map, with these kinds of projects, do you feel like your ordinance and what you just discussed, do you think that would be addressed? Would whatever vision plan is being proposed for Parade Street or Erie Coke site or IRG or Savacchio Park? Just kind of throwing, there's projects happening, or, you know, do you feel like you're prepared from a zoning standpoint to address what
We
you
don't have
know?
an official map is really what we need, right?
Do you know what's proposed on like Parade? Are you keyed in?
We've loosely been introduced to them. It's more what we hear on the news, right?
Oh, yeah, better get that in front of you.
It's more what we catch on the news, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, most everything that will happen on all those plans, the answer is no. We get to be reactive after the horses left the barn. You know, if we could do anything, it's fighting a rear guard action.
Yeah.
You know, I think that we had a very interesting discussion last month on 12th Street and what ought to happen to the rest of it, because West 12th Street, to a point, was dealt with, and it got shortened because time and there was some apparent feeling that the other part of the West 12th Street was already dealt with and didn't need any more thought about it. So,
Are you talking about more west or more east?
more east.
East, oh. So what
The
I'm
east
showing
end of
here,
West,
yeah.
no, not East 12th Street, but the east end of
Yeah,
West
into the
12th.
downtown.
To downtown,
Yeah.
yeah. And we have, but what this doesn't need to be is the thing that we're very good at here, and that's to create plans and put them on a shelf.
So I wanted to bring this piece up because, yeah, you're going to be right. Everything you just said, you were talking about, your objectives are very neighborhood corridor based. How does it apply then to the big projects? And if you say, well, we don't know, we're going to react to those, what's the change? Maybe that's an objective unto itself, right?
Mm-hmm.
You know, we talked about official map, but
If we had an official map, it wouldn't be them coming to us. They would have to abide by the map, or try to find some variance in the system to.
You're going to create a zoning map that's going to do that. They're going to have to abide by, the official map really just looks at public spaces and things like that, but the zoning map, which you would eventually create or recreate, is going to impact what happens on Erie Coke, or they're coming to you asking for a rezoning, or there's modifications, variances, whatever. So maybe there's a disconnect here as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it shouldn't be.
A zoning map is too, it's either too finely grained, or, you look at the colors on the map, it's not.
It's a lot of colors on just one section of map.
But big blocks of areas where there's no control. We only have control after the fact. When somebody puts forth a project, comes and says, we want to do this, and you go, well, no, we don't think that's quite the right thing, and they may or may not. There is not the ability to be involved with development plans as they develop. So that, and nowhere in the process is there any approval until somebody's looking for a recommendation to council, if they have to be, if that ever is necessary.
So that would typically, zoning helps. You can write some certain review processes in the zoning, but that all happens mostly in the SALDO, land development proposal. If it's going to come to the planning commission, what size development triggers a review by the planning commission to make it a public process, right?
Right.
So that's where I think we have to talk about SALDO too, but the SALDO is much more technical, right? You've seen the subdivision pieces of that, and but the land development is what you just talked about,
Right.
Rich, is development proposals are coming forward.
Right.
You're not seeing them, so how can you aptly apply use restrictions,
Right.
which is zoning, and some development controls? Are you understanding what our goals are, your goals are with that, if you're in always a reactionary mode, which is, I think, what's happening now. You just said it. It's happening now.
Yeah.
I don't see any of that.
Yeah.
Right. And yet zoning is solidly part of what's been what you've discussed for probably a few years now, right? And that's where the rubber meets the road, is what can be done here. And the SALDO is like, well, how is it done? And is it aptly applied? But you're never seeing it.
Yeah.
We can just start rejecting everything, and then people can't rely on wishful thinking and rubber stamps.
Well, I'm not a lawyer, Jason. Don't worry, you probably can't do that. Anyway, so I think that's another layer of an objective. Objective is, how do you make this more of a public process? You don't necessarily want to open up a can of worms every time someone wants to do it. You get a lot of that with the waterfront district.
Yeah, you can reject everything, though. If they don't meet the code,
Right.
what's on the books, then we can be a barrier to development. We don't want to be.
No.
But we can force everybody to come to us and get our approval, but you can still, we're just a recommending body. You can still go around us and take everything to city council anyway.
Or variances, right? They're going through variances. So there's a due process. But at least at this point, you're seeing what's coming down the pipeline, and you as policy advisors are in a better position to advise on that policy, rather than I think, just react to what you're probably hearing. Well, the two of you, right, you have very specific skill set that puts you in front of developers a lot, so you get to hear the constraints. Mark, you're just well-known, so I'm sure everyone walks up to you in the bars and restaurants and says, I got something to say. Right?
Restaurant.
Right, I don't think your clientele is coming to you with any complaints on zoning. I'm just saying, Mark. If they are, wow. Anyway, I just wanted to kind of point this out too as something that you want to consider as an objective.
Well, I go back to one of your earlier slides, and it's where you had, collecting information, and then kind of the highlighted yellow squares, and then there was a futures map.
Yeah, the future.
The future map. And then beyond it, there was kind of a grayed out square that was like the next step. And so, one of my questions for the goal is you're going to make recommendations as to what happens to this.
Yeah.
I mean, well, yeah. But, I mean, because in your former life, one of the things we had started talking about was the development process and all of the land development and saldo process.
Mm-hmm.
And you left and kind of were off in a different direction. So I just,
Yeah, so what we'll provide you is not just two maps.
Yeah.
This is what, a list of community development objectives. And happy to do the ancillary policy, like what's not on the map. Like,
Right.
here's another list of things that we uncovered
Right.
because you told us or other people have told us. Here's other issues that may not be something that translates to a map, but it translates to what else the zoning and saldo does, which is a lot of policy stuff, processes, protocols.
Yeah.
Like, there's so much more in zoning and saldo that's beyond just the map.
Yeah, we're going to make, I think what we need is for you to create a to-do list that we approve for Jackie. What happens after this is done, where should we be headed?
Yeah. And we've had those conversations.
Yeah.
We just said, well, this is a better place for I thought we needed to start, because I know I could not have gone into your zoning ordinance and done an analysis of barriers without having this conversation. What are you talking about? What are like we did with Manheim Township? Our barriers are housing. They would not have been able to express that
Right.
prior to having what is your goal here conversations. And so I wanted to take a moment to do that. Now, you're one body and a very important body and stakeholder part of this, but we're also going to go here, and we've heard, Jake was maybe dealing with a little roof issue, which I understood at our first conversation, but we're going to have more conversations with zoning officers. But we've had those discussions. And what we heard from there is much more of like the day-to-day pain points, right? Which makes sense because they're dealing with it day-to-day. But the neighborhood groups are going to tell us, inform, because what we want at the end of the day is these community developed objectives not to be ones that 4 people just told us about, but ones that are generally supported by this community as a whole. And then that will help frame next steps. The next step is looking at your zoning ordinance and does it represent these objectives? Probably not, because you're saying, no, we've seen where it has not met these objectives because you just established them. And that will most likely be in the form, cherry picking sections of your zoning to change, I don't think is the place that you're at now. It's what has been done, and it's because it is, when you want to overhaul and rewrite a zoning ordinance, it takes time because you got to blow it up and reconstitute it. But it is the best way to make sure that the law is written the way that you think it should be written, instead of what happens over time as you piecemeal it. It becomes almost a Frankenstein. And sometimes the monster doesn't want to behave. right? Does that make sense? So you will get a list of to do, and we're not fixing it in 3 months. Wish we could. Boy, we'd make millions of dollars if we could do it in 3 months, but that's not the process, because this takes some time. But this has been extremely helpful, and probably I didn't stop talking, Mark, so you knew I wasn't going
wrote
to.
it down.
Samantha, is there anything on your end that we maybe didn't cover? We have these takeaways too, which Seth and I sat here, and this probably brings us full circle, that there aren't citywide land use objectives in your plans that really, there's few, if any. Legacy development patterns with the city has created constraints with traditional zoning on top of it, which is a lot of what you just said, and Jason started it. Seems to be a lack of cohesion between commercial areas and surrounding residential areas, so that's where, corridors that look like commercial and mixed use should function as commercial mixed use. And at the time that we were having this conversation, it really was unclear if current zoning ordinance was positively or negatively impacting ongoing or proposed developments. And what you just said is, well, we don't know because we don't see those developments until there's a problem. So it was fairly accurate. There may be more. This was just our initial thoughts and takeaways, but.
Yeah, and to add to that, and we've talked about this, is that if things are not working properly in terms of process, then we need to change them. I think that needs to be added to it. That's a hindrance on development. If there's uncertainty in the private sector, they're not going to want to come here. Or if you are not seeing developments and you're not aware of things, how can you make informed decisions on those properties?
Mm-hmm. I'm sorry, I took your hour. I'm not sorry. You haven't seen me in a while. No. Okay, that's it. We'll stop. I swear. Thank you very much. This was very helpful. We'll see you, probably not January, but February. Sorry, Russ.
Kathy, are we going to have would you want to have a study, like a separate special meeting with?
Go ahead.
I think a work session with the Planning Commission,
Yes.
probably in February,
Okay,
would
yeah.
make some sense.
Continue this, or just go over to the next meeting?
We can continue.
Okay.
We just were talking about having a special meeting or study session with the Planning Commission probably in February.
Yeah, once we have the
So-
future, we don't want to just hand you a future map and say, here you go. We'll want to work with you on that, what we found. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for your patience as we got through it. Thanks, Samantha.
Thank you all. I'm looking forward to this. Thanks.
Okay. We're usually done by now.
Yeah.
12th Street Reimagined.
All right. So I'm back again to talk about 12th Street. I am formally requesting, again this time, that the Planning Commission vote to place the 12th Street Reimagined plan on the upcoming City Council agenda for next time City Council's tomorrow for consideration for full adoption. While I understand, and I hear you on the comments that you made last time, and I understand your frustration with the planning of 12th Street, the 12th Street corridor, of the timing of the project, of what has come in past years with PennDOT, with the city. There are several reasons why this plan should be adopted as part of the city's vision for 12th Street. I have 3 of them that I'd like to just mention to you and ask for your consideration. The first is that we're currently involved in a Safe Streets and Roads for All project that should absolutely incorporate the 12th Street Reimagined findings, designs, and recommendations as part of the safety action plan that will be complete in March of next year. After that, we will go out for implementation money to implement the safety action plan. 12th Street is part of the high injury network and a priority location to implement these safety solutions. As you know, we've had 3 pedestrians killed on 12th Street just this year. And the connections and improvements for pedestrians included in the 12th Street Reimagined Plan would be priority projects for the Safety Action Plan that we'll be finished with in March. If we receive implementation funding for the next Safe Streets grants, we could make these improvements rather quickly. Second, one good outcome that evolved during this planning process of the 12th Street Plan with PennDOT, Public Works, and our traffic consultants is that the plan that was developed is implementable and it's feasible, it's practical. The recommendations are things that can be funded and built. The alternative to that, of course, would be that we ended up with some kind of visionary plan that would sit on the shelf and collect dust, and that would not be built upon. We look at this plan as an incremental progress, okay? Especially with the stakeholders we had around the table this time, many of which were the business communities on the west side of the 12th Street corridor that steadfastly did not want major infrastructure changes on 12th Street, but acknowledged the need for pedestrian improvements. These initial conversations we hope will evolve over time and develop into future, maybe more aggressive planning actions in this area and all throughout the corridor on 12th Street. And just lastly, as a reminder, there are hundreds of students from Strong Vincent Middle School, from Cathedral Prep, and from Erie High crossing 12th Street daily, hundreds. And this 12th Street Reimagined Plan speaks quickly to improvements for those students. So I ask that you take a vote to allow this to get onto City Council's agenda and hopefully be fully adopted by Council. Any questions?
I don't have a problem with that.
I've changed mine, but
Huh?
I'm not. You can.
For the reasons noted, I will recommend approval of the plan as proposed.
Well, I'll second that. All in favor? Okay.
Thank you.
I'm a nay. I'm a nay on that.
Because I didn't hear any Russ saying.
Did you say opposed?
Yeah.
2 of us said approved, 1 said opposed.
I'm opposed, just for clarity.
Clarity.
For the record, do you think that Jason and Colin, you can give a reason as to why you're opposing this time around, just so I can have it on record? Can you give some reasons to why?
Because the project isn't equitably distributed across 12th Street, and some of the deaths have occurred outside of this zone. The project should extend across all of 12th Street. Abbreviated planning is not good planning, in my opinion. It's finish the project.
Colin, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I mean, just kind of reiterating previous points made in past commission meetings. I think the incompleteness of it, I think it shifts the burden to taxpayers when it's fundamentally the root cause by private businesses not taking care of their own facilities. I think that it is short-sighted, and while I certainly appreciate the points you brought up, I think regardless of how this is voted on, it is going to end up on that stack of plans for the sake of planning. And I think having incorporated in Safe Streets and us approving the Safe Streets plan is a much more pragmatic approach. I just think this is incomplete and doesn't really do much to move the needle at all.
I mean, I could respond but I don't want to respond if it's not going to change your mind. I only would say that, for reasons that Kathy just brought up, there's a section on land use in there and zoning. There's also projects and discussions that we had with PennDOT that should be part of the safety action plan. And I would hate for this work that was done and the money that was spent to be for, to have to redo or waste the money and have to redo the project. So even by adopting it, we're using the language and recommendations that are in that plan to take the initial steps to hopefully have a more comprehensive approach in the safety action plan, which 12th Street, all of 12th Street is in the high injury network and a priority. So, yeah. Okay.
Somebody died this week on 12th Street in the area that you're ignoring. Your choice.
Okay. I don't know where I go from here.
Well, I mean, I don't, if the plan is not fully adopted, I mean, we're still going to use those recommendations moving forward. We're not ignoring that part of 12th Street. It happens to be that Cherry to Green Garden was the study area for this funding stream. And we're absolutely not ignoring 12th Street at all. In fact, it is one of the priority streets that we're focused on for the safety action plan.
Look at it comprehensively, like you said you're gonna.
But we weren't looking at just for transportation. We were looking at also for land use, for economic development. So there were other factors that this project evolved into. So we'll still use the recommendations and the outcomes of the 12th Street Reimagined Plan as we move forward. We're not going to, it just won't be a fully adopted plan and recognized as recognized as one of the city's visions. So.
Can we table this for reconsideration pending completion and review of the Safe Streets program or some of the other more comprehensive programs that we're looking for this stuff to be addressed with?
Are you asking me, Colin, or are you asking the planning commission?
I'm putting it out there into the
atmosphere.
Putting it out there for whoever can answer it.
Yeah, right. Sorry, Jake, you're not on.
Since the motion was voted on, I mean, it's a little late to recant it and table it, but certainly it can be brought up in future meetings if there's a reconsideration to fully adopt it.
Makes sense.
Okay. Okay, where are we at? Planning and Neighborhood Resources Update.
Sure. The only real update that I wanted to bring forth to you today was that we did pick a consultant finally for the comprehensive recreation parks and open space plan. They've accepted, and we are working through the contract right now. I hope to have that complete by the first of the year and work to start fairly quickly after that. I do want to mention to you that the $4 million in parks planning, parks and open space planning that we had in ARP money, while this was a loan, an 18-month loan, just to make sure you saw it on City Council agenda, there was a loan given to Eagles Nest out of that park funding that hopefully we will receive back in 18 months for implementation money for this parks plan. I don't know if you were aware of that, but there was money that was used out of those coffers. In terms of any other updates at this moment, I don't have anything further. We are working through the historic resource survey. The downtown is complete, as well as 12th Street, and the consultants will be in town after the first of the year to work through our West Bay front, and then continue on through the other areas for this first phase. Please go to the story map online and give your input into, are you familiar with this? I think Heather presented the website. I can give you another flyer. We have just a few cataloged, and we need more people to tell their stories about historic places and landmarks and areas of the city. One other update that I was thinking of is, unfortunately, Heather, who is here in the audience, she is moving on, and her last day will be this Friday. So that position will be posted hopefully by the end of this week. And we thank Heather for all her hard work during this transition, during this period to really rebuild the historic preservation program at the city, and to connect and reconnect with some of our partners outside of City Hall. She's done a great job with that, to build the program up again. So that position will be posted, like I said, hopefully by the end of this week. And in the meantime, myself and Cooper will be filling in as in that position. So we have a lot going on there in historic preservation. But yeah, that's about it. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't think we have anybody else on, do we? For public comment? Nope. I need a motion to adjourn then,
Motion.
and a second.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
All right.
Aye.
Thank you.